Pope Francis has passed away early this morning at 7:35 local time. He died after really the cardinals had been instructed to be in Rome in March. So this is not a total shock. He went into irreversible cardiac arrest after having a stroke of the lung. Pope Francis was 88, going on 89. And I'll tell you, over the last 12 years, there have been times that many of us have anticipated how long the Francis pontificate might last. I've thought about it quite a bit because he was such an aggressive leftist adjudicator from the chair of Peter that I've thought, was this going to go on 20 years? And it went on a bit over 12. And now he's dead. And there's going to be three aspects of this I want to talk to you about today. First, the first thing we need to talk about is establishing that he died, what things are going to happen now. Because logistically speaking, it's interesting. A lot of you might be converts in the last 5 years or the last 12 years. And there are 9 things that you should take into consideration just logistically what will happen next. But the first element of this is prayer for the Pope specifically and for the church. I know you know this, and I know people will say on this channel, I'll lead with a prayer sometimes, but it's not every show. I really want to lead a sincere prayer for the man, Pope Francis, who has expressed himself as a person very openly. That's one of probably his great asset. What he brought to the pontificate is a willingness always, Pope Francis, to say what he thought. And at times this ran foul of what his duties of Pope were. And I was one of the foremost ones to express that. I'm not leaving that in the lurch. But I appreciate about this man, now that he's passed away, the dimension of personal honesty, that we know much more about his tastes and distastes than, say, Benedict XVI, his predecessor. This is an interesting man. Any way you cut it. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, who died early this morning in Italy, was an interesting man. And I'll tell you this, as one of his loudest English language detractors, Taylor Marshall, myself, maybe Anthony Stein, one of the other most prominent American detractors of the Pope Francis pontificate, I can tell you with all honesty, I don't have to go phony baloney church lady to feel empathy or sympathy for Pope Francis. In all sincerity, I don't. I do not have to go, well, we know we didn't like how he governed, but let's pray for him. I feel nothing but prayerful hope that this man can be ushered into the gates of heaven, or at least purgatory, even though I've made no compunction about expressing, I think he's been a very, 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 very poor Pope. I don't have to go phony baloney because of how ardently Pope Francis has consistently expressed himself emotionally and privately, but in public. And one of the foremost things he said, I'll go through some of the things that the man has contributed from his own private life. But one of the foremost fascinating aspects about the man is he's always said, time and again, that he's fearful of the kind of sickness unto death, the natural sickness unto natural death, constituted by suffering, sickness, death, our human situation. And I always found this very easy to relate to, and more than relate to, I found it refreshing, in a weird way, that he's not so spiritually far ahead of, and many of us in this way at least, that it's hard to relate to him. The other popes live a private, kind of secluded life, don't have the families that we have in the married vocation, such that it's difficult to relate when they're just completely ready to cash it all in. And Francis said many times he was afraid to get sick and then to die. And so when he was going through this last couple of months, I've stayed away from Francis news, because when he pops back up, it's bad, and I didn't want to do that. But I have felt deep compassion for the man, and it's been easy for me to pray for him. Easier for me and Steph to pray with our kids for Francis than it's ever been before. Because I know he's a nearly 90-year-old man that was on his way out, and I just want him to go to heaven if it's somehow possible. That's what I'm praying today. That's why we prayed the Our Father. I'll at some point today, we'll pray for the church, a special prayer we saw on Elizabeth Yore's Twitter account for the church, that she receive an amazing number 267, or let's just say successor to Francis. But for now, I'm just saying he's an interesting man who always expressed himself when he's talking about his private affairs, his private sentiments, his private grievances. He always expressed himself honestly, and I can respect that. Also like that he said there's too much fraccione in the church. That was a great moment. Kind of a private expression of something he, I guess, knew to be true. I liked when he said, if someone makes fun of your mother, the church, you punch him in the nose. I liked what he expressed to the young leftist females on the Disney documentary when they brought up abortion and female deacons. He was really clear there. Now, as a pontiff, as a leader, as a kind of necessary politician, we know his speech was marked by unclarity. So I am just talking about when Francis was shooting from the hip. A lot of times I would disagree with the sentiments he's expressing, but when he was shooting from the hip and he said something good, it was right on. It was very refreshing. So I just want to take this time to appreciate these moments about the man, and appreciate more than even these moments that I cheered on at the time, that he was honest about something that's difficult for holy men to be honest about: sickness, suffering, death. He was very honest about it, and that made it very easy to pray him through these last few months. And hopefully he's there now. I don't have to go phony baloney Susan from the parish council to feel legitimate tenderness in my heart and to pray for him. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm such a compassionate cat. I'm saying it's because he expressed himself so honestly that it made him very easy to relate to in his frailty. I want to talk about the 9 things that we need to do now. It's also surreal, isn't it? I still can't believe it. It's a weird day, very odd. I heard first thing in the morning, my phone started buzzing at 5:36, something. Yeah. So something like that. And it's just been an odd day. Now, it's not the passing of a great figure in the history of the church. That's not why it's an odd day. It's an odd and a sad day because it was our leader, Pope Francis, by all measures. And a confusing day because, how do you talk about a fallen leader as, phonies would say, complex or complicated, but as troubling as the figure of Pope Francis, who we want to, commend to heaven with our prayer, but at the same time be honest about. And, the honesty we shouldn't wait for. I hope the guy goes to heaven I hope he goes to heaven. That's all I can say.
It almost feels like, I think a lot of us have daddy issues with our pontiff, and it just feels like it's traumatic. And it just feels kind of like, not really knowing what to do because you have these issues with the Pope. You've been one of the leading voices with all the issues that we've had. So it's an odd feeling today. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like if you're out of perfect communication with your biological father and he were something like death happens to him when you're out of communication. That's a bit how it felt. I was always hoping that he would reconcile himself to the traditional minded Catholics out there, to the TLM community, that he would undo. So I'm not just talking about Traditionis Custodes, but so many of the far left-leaning progressive things he had done, which felt more like he was doing them to the traditionalists in the church than did it feel like he was doing them for the sake of progressivism, though maybe it was both at once. Maybe those two things constitute each other. I don't know, but it's confusing and a bit sad. No, what's not confusing is what kind of Pope he was. He was really, 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 really troubling as a Pope. And that doesn't mean that we lessen our prayers at all. It just means, holy cow, what did we just go through for the last 12 years? I mean, it's wild, isn't it? It's completely wild what we just went through. And really, was it 12 or 13 years? Yeah, it was the last 12 years. We need in the next 15 days, I'm not saying it has to be rushed, but has to be maybe the 13th or the 14th day. We need the cardinals to look into seriously, perhaps in a special conclave, the claims made by none other than the Pope's biographer, Austin Ivory himself, in the first few pages of the first edition of The Great Reformer, the book about Pope Francis that came out when he first became Pope, where in those pages, Austin Ivory said that Francis himself agreed to be canvassed for by those like Cardinal Gottfried Daniels and Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and Cardinal Walter Casper, who also recently died, about a week ago, died. I mean, both of these guys died recently. Casper, McCarrick, Daniels died a few years ago, but they are known as the St. Gallen Mafia. And many of you who are watching me right now got into Catholic YouTube watching Taylor Marshall and myself do a few locked-in shows on the St. Gallen Mafia and its role in Francis's election and its role in Francis's ongoing adjudication legislation. The people that, by their admission, by his own biographer's admission, put him in power for a reason, to be a great reformer. Austin Ivory pulled his first edition of Great Reformer off the shelves within a few days of publishing it, only to say, oh, and we need to get out a second edition, because he was bragging so loudly, he lost sight of the fact that the information he had released could get Francis lete sententiae excommunicated. There's no nice way to say it. For agreeing to be canvassed for by canvassers who are not supposed to be taking action in certain ways before, during, or after the conclave. They're not supposed to be doing this. And Francis was not supposed to be agreeing to it. And when we have a first edition, my friend Patrick Coffin has a copy of the first edition, and you can see pages online, screenshotted, of the first, I forget what exact page it is, 4 or 5, I think, of that first edition of The Great Reformer, where Francis, according to his biographer, Austin Ivory, says, yes, go ahead and canvass for me. This represents something that needs investigation. And I've only made ephemeral, fleeting references to this before. I have talked about it some. But this is the time where we have to talk about it before jumping into a successor for Francis or what would be a replacement number 266. I don't have the answer. I have never claimed to have the answer as to the riddle, the enigma of the pontificate of Pope Francis. And I'm still not claiming to know, but I am claiming to know that as a matter of evidence, there is a fair amount that Francis did something that, according to the document UDG circulated by the University Dominici Gregis by John Paul II, would constitute late sententiae excommunication and could literally mean he wasn't ever pope. Now, I'm not saying I know this is the case. I'm saying the cardinals are the ones that need to make this investigation. You see the difference? Even now, even after the pontificate of Francis is ostensibly over, I'm saying the people who are charged with this duty need to go do it, because we don't want 70 years to lapse like an Avignon papacy. We don't want confusion to reign where later on, number 266 becomes number 265 or number, that's not what it would be. 267 becomes number 266. That's confusing. You want to correct the record as early as you can. Now, the tension is, of course, personnel. These people were all, in the cardinalate anyway, emplaced by Francis, or like 2/3 of them close to. So they're not going to be the ones that are most statistically likely to revisit the topic. But it needs to happen. And this is where a lot of people started watching YouTube, was watching me and Taylor Marshall talking about the St. Gallen Mafia. This is not a question that should just be brushed to the side without investigation.
Part of me was actually hoping that you and Taylor Marshall could reunite for this show. It almost seems like it should have happened,
Maybe
it should have been.
Maybe a conclave show, I think would be fitting. Or maybe let's have a special conclave episode. I don't know. I'm up for it. Taylor, what do you say? Catholic YouTube was really popularized by those episodes, and people don't, I want to be extra respectful on the day that the ostensible pontiff passes, but that doesn't mean you have to pretend. There's just so much record of a guy like me saying so much that would just make me a phony if I were to pretend that I'd never said these things or never believed these things. That's hogwash. And I also have never pretended I knew for sure. It's just when you read that, whatever it is, the 4th page of the first edition of Great Reformer, you're like, wow, this is his biographer quoting him and the guys that put him into power ostensibly illegally, and they had to rip it off the bookshelves. This needs to be dealt with. And there's other evidence that our friend Julia Maloney has added to this pile that just they should try to do before they do another conclave. Now, the trick is, if he didn't turn out to have been Pope, then all of those cardinals would no longer be cardinals. So it gets so messy so quick. And unlike my friends Patrick Coffin or Dr. Edward Mazza, I understand the praxeological and logistical damn near impossibility, difficulty approaching impossibility to sort all that out. And they're just like, oh, well, truth is truth. No, absolutely. We need the truth with what was going on during this troublesome pontificate from the outset, from its origins. I mean, maybe sometime we could get Julia back on the show. I don't know. I mean, she's the people that are like, look at the evidence tend to be the folks that are not out there claiming they know. I mean, Julia knows more about the St. Gallen Mafia than anybody I know, even Taylor or me. And she doesn't just shoot her mouth off about it. That's the interesting thing. So what does it mean? I don't know exactly, aside from the fact that we can't just skip this middle step.